For Thanksgiving, my daughter gave her mother-in-law a week-long luxury cruise. She handed me a cheap electric drill from a discount store. "Here, Dad," she said, with a dismissive wave, "something to keep you busy." A month later, she was on my doorstep begging for a secret only I knew. A secret she'd traded for a shiny new toy. As we dive into Stephen's journey, I invite you to join our storytelling family by subscribing. It means the world to us. Now let's begin. The scent of cedar shavings hung heavy in the air, a comforting aroma that had permeated Stephen's workshop for over 40 years. Sunlight streamed through the large, dusty windows, illuminating the intricate patterns he was carving into a small wooden rocking horse. His gnarled hands, calloused from years of shaping wood, moved with a practiced grace, bringing the toy to life. It was a gift for his grandson Leo, who would be visiting for Thanksgiving. The thought brought a familiar ache to Steve's chest. Since his wife Martha had passed 5 years ago, the holidays had become a bittersweet reminder of what he had lost. He missed her laughter, her warmth, the way she always managed to fill their small Vermont home with an abundance of love and cheer. Now it was just him rattling around in the house he had built with his own 2 hands. He glanced at the cheap electric drill sitting on his workbench, a cruel mockery of his skills. Amanda had given it to him at Thanksgiving dinner, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of pity and thinly veiled contempt. "Something to keep you busy, Dad," she'd said, her voice dripping with condescension. The image still stung. He was a craftsman, a woodworker, not some handyman who needed a power tool from a discount store. His hands, his knowledge, his love for the craft, these were his tools. They were what defined him. He picked up the wooden horse, his fingers tracing the smooth curves, and thought of Leo. His grandson was the one bright spot in his life, a reminder that even in the face of loss, there was still beauty and hope to be found. Leo loved to spend time in his workshop, watching him work, asking endless questions about the tools and the wood. He wanted to pass on his craft to Leo to instill in him the same appreciation for the simple beauty of creating something with your own hands. The phone rang, startling him. It was Amanda calling to confirm their plans for Thanksgiving. "We're still coming, Dad," she said, her voice rushed, "but we're going to be late. Ryan's parents are having a pre-Thanksgiving dinner, and we have to make an appearance." Steve sighed. He knew what that meant. Amanda and Ryan were always chasing after the approval of Ryan's wealthy parents, desperate to fit into their world of country clubs and luxury cars. He was nothing but an embarrassment to them, a reminder of their humble beginnings. "Okay, honey," Steve said, his voice weary. "Just be careful driving." The scent of cedar shavings filled his workshop as he hung up the phone. He chose to ignore the cold knot in his stomach, focusing instead on the image of his family together. It was a hope he wasn't ready to let go of just yet. The old pickup truck rumbled down the winding Vermont road, its engine a familiar comforting growl against the crisp November air. The trees, stripped of their fiery autumn colors, stood like stark silhouettes against a pale gray sky. I held the steering wheel, my knuckles white, a handcrafted maplewood salad bowl resting on the passenger seat, a small piece offering a symbol of my world to bring into theirs. Pulling into their driveway felt like crossing a border into another country. My truck, with its faded blue paint and a lifetime of honorable dents, looked like a stray dog next to the gleaming Audis and BMWs that lined the cobblestone path. Ryan's parents, the Hamiltons, lived in a modern colonial, all sharp angles and sprawling windows that seemed to stare out judgmentally over the manicured lawn. It wasn't a home. It was a statement. Amanda met me at the door, her smile tight. "Dad, you made it," she chirped, kissing the air beside my cheek. She was wearing a silk dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She quickly took the wooden bowl from my hands. "Oh, how rustic. I'll find a place for it." She whisked it away to the kitchen as if it were contaminated. The house buzzed with the low hum of polite conversation and the clinking of crystal glasses. Ryan clapped me on the shoulder a little too hard. "Steve, good to see you. Grab a drink." His father, Richard Hamilton, a man with a stiff posture and colder eyes, offered a curt nod. "Stephen, good of you to join us." I felt like an exhibit, the blue-collar father-in-law on display. My grandson Leo was my only refuge. He ran to me, his face lighting up. "Grandpa, did you bring me anything?" I slipped him a small carved bird from my pocket, and his delighted squeal was the only genuine sound I'd heard all afternoon. Dinner was a meticulously orchestrated affair. The table was laden with food that looked more like art than a meal served on plates that seemed too fragile to touch. The conversation flowed around me, a river of talk about stock portfolios, European vacations, and yacht club regattas. I sat in silence, nursing a glass of water, feeling the gap between my world and theirs widen into a chasm, After the pecan pie, Richard cleared his throat for the main event. Amanda Ryan, he began, your mother and I have a little something for you. He slid a thick envelope across the table. It was the deed to a timeshare in the Caribbean. The room erupted in performative gasps and applause. Then Amanda stood up, beaming. And we have a surprise for you, too, she announced. We wanted to give you something you've always talked about. She presented her in-laws with a portfolio containing tickets for a 2-week luxury cruise through the Mediterranean. More applause, more air kisses. Richard hugged her, booming, "That's my girl." My heart sank. I knew what was coming. The hollow ritual of gift-giving designed to reinforce status. Amanda turned to me, a small, brightly wrapped box in her hand. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "And for you, Dad," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Something to help you with your little hobby." The box felt unnaturally light in my hands. The wrapping paper was thin generic, the kind you buy in a roll at a dollar store. A stark contrast to the thick embossed paper used for the Hamiltons' gifts. The silence in the room was heavy, expectant. I could feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting for a reaction. I forced my fingers clumsy with a sudden tremor to tear the paper away. Inside, nestled in cheap plastic casing, was a cordless drill. It was an off-brand I'd never heard of, its bright orange body garish and toy-like. It felt flimsy, poorly balanced. An insult not just to me but to my craft. My entire life's work, the knowledge passed down from my father, the thousands of hours spent honing my skills, all of it reduced to a little hobby that could be serviced by this cheap piece of junk. A faint smirk played on Ryan's lips. Richard Hamilton leaned back in his chair, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. They had planned this. This was not a thoughtless gift. It was a calculated gesture of disrespect. Amanda's smile was plastered on a brittle, perfect facade. Only Leo looked confused, his brow furrowed as he glanced from the drill to my face. The air in my lungs turned to ice. For a fleeting moment I imagined throwing the box across the room, watching the cheap plastic shatter against their pristine white walls. I imagined shouting, telling them what I thought of their money and their empty, polished lives. But I did none of those things. My own father's voice echoed in my mind from long ago. "Dignity, son. It's the one thing they can't take from you unless you give it away." I looked up, meeting Amanda's gaze. I manufactured a smile, though it felt like my face might crack. "Thank you, Amanda," I said. My voice came out quiet, steady, devoid of the fury that was raging inside me. "It's practical." I placed the box carefully on the floor beside my chair and pushed myself up. "Well," I announced to the room, "it's getting late for an old man. I should be heading home." "So soon, Dad?" Amanda asked, a flicker of something annoyance relief in her eyes. "Long day," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. I walked over to Leo, ruffling his hair and giving him a firm hug. "Be good, little man," I whispered, the words meant only for him. He hugged me back tightly, the one pure, honest connection in that cold, cavernous house. I gave a single formal nod to the Hamiltons and walked out the door without looking back. The drive home was a blur. The dark Vermont roads mirrored the emptiness that had opened up inside me. The cheap drill sat on the passenger seat, its bright orange a hateful splash of color in the dim cab light. It seemed to hum with the laughter and whispers I had left behind. Back in my own silent house, I walked straight to the workshop. The familiar smell of wood and varnish did little to soothe me. I placed the new drill on my workbench, right next to my own tools, the heavy German-made chisels with worn walnut handles, the handplane my father had given me, its steel surface gleaming softly. The contrast was sickening. The heat in my chest didn't fade. It cooled, hardening into something solid, heavy, and patient. Something that could wait. Sleep had been a stranger, visiting only in brief, restless intervals. I was up before the sun, the gray light of dawn filtering into the kitchen, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. The house was utterly silent, a silence that once felt peaceful, but now seemed to echo with the emptiness of the previous night. I went through the motions of making coffee, the familiar ritual of grinding beans and pouring water, feeling hollow, automatic. I sat at the kitchen table, the warm mug a small comfort in my cold hands, and stared out at the bare branches of the maple tree in my yard. From this angle, I could see into the workshop. The orange drill sat on the workbench, a garish stain on the sanctity of my space. I had felt a cold, clean anger last night, a righteous anger that gave me a sense of purpose. But in the harsh light of morning, it was just a dull, heavy ache. Had I overreacted? Was it just a thoughtless, clumsy gesture from a daughter who had drifted too far away? More out of habit than anything else, a quiet ritual to feel connected? I pulled out my phone. I often scrolled through pictures of Leo in the morning. His bright, gap-toothed smile was a reliable antidote to the loneliness. My thumb moved across the screen, opening the social media app, where Amanda frequently posted photos of him. And then I saw it. Her latest post from just a few hours after she'd gotten home last night. It was a picture. The cheap orange drill was positioned artfully on her marble countertop next to a bottle of champagne and the glossy brochure for the Mediterranean cruise. The contrast was deliberate cruel, but it was the caption that felt like a punch to the gut. Wrapped up a wonderful Thanksgiving with the family, it read, "So blessed to be able to treat the Hamiltons to a little getaway. And we made sure Dad has a new toy to keep him busy with his little hobby number, family first, number blessed number, retirement life." My breath caught in my throat. The coffee mug slipped from my numb fingers, clattering against the table, spilling dark liquid across the wood grain. I barely noticed. I was transfixed by the screen. It wasn't just a private insult anymore. She had taken my humiliation and broadcast it to her hundreds of friends, packaging it as a witty little anecdote, a joke at my expense. The comments underneath were a cascade of digital laughter. "You're too good to him, Amanda," LOL, one friend wrote. Another added, "That drill is hilarious. What a classic dad gift." Each like was a small, sharp sting. Each comment another twist of the knife. She hadn't just insulted me. She had invited the world to laugh with her. The dull ache in my chest vanished, incinerated by a white-hot flash of fury so intense it made my vision swim. This was not a clumsy mistake. This was a deliberate act of cruelty. She had held my dignity up for public ridicule. The hope I'd clung to, the faint belief that my daughter was still somewhere beneath that polished, materialistic surface, shattered into a million pieces. The tremor in my hands stopped. The coffee pooling on the table seemed distant, unimportant. A profound, chilling clarity washed over me. There were no more doubts, no more second-guessing. She had made her choice. Now I would make mine. The cold clarity from that morning didn't drive me to the workshop. It drove me upstairs towards the pull-down cord for the attic. For years Martha had asked me to sort through the boxes up there, and for years I had put it off. It was a tomb of memories I wasn't ready to face. But now something had shifted. I needed order. I needed to clear away the clutter, both physical and emotional. A puff of dust motes danced in the single beam of light from my flashlight as I ascended the rickety ladder. The air was thick with the scent of old paper-dried pine and time itself. Boxes were stacked everywhere, labeled in my mother's neat cursive or my father's blocky print. I started systematically moving from one corner to the next, not looking for anything in particular, just sorting. Old tax records went into a discard pile. Children's clothes I'd forgotten we'd kept went into a donation box. The work was methodical, mindless, and it quieted the storm inside me. In the far back, tucked under a canvas tarp, was a heavy steamer trunk I hadn't seen in decades. It had belonged to my grandparents. The leather straps were cracked, and the brass latches were tarnished. I pried it open, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, beneath a layer of moth-eaten wool blankets, was a worn leather folio. My fingers, rough with calluses, traced the faded gold lettering on the cover, property of Alistair Croft, my grandfather. I opened it carefully. Inside was a collection of documents, all tied with a faded red ribbon. On top was the deed to a parcel of land, 80 acres of forest up on Black Creek Mountain. I knew of the land, of course. It had been in the family for generations, passed down to me when my father died. I'd paid the small property tax on it every year without a second thought, assuming it was just another patch of rugged Vermont woodland too remote to be of any real value. Amanda had once called it Dad's worthless patch of dirt. But tucked beneath the deed was something else. A hand-drawn map of the property, the paper yellowed and brittle with age. And with it a short, handwritten letter from my own father, dated a year before he passed. My eyes scanned the familiar script. "Steve," it read, "don't ever sell the North Woods. Your grandfather always said there was a secret in those maples. Not treasure, but something just as valuable. He called them his curly-haired beauties. Said their grain was like a fingerprint unique in all the world. Take a walk up there someday. Really look at the trees. A secret in those maples." The words echoed a memory faint and distant of my father, trying to tell me something about the forest, something I had been too young and too busy to pay attention to. Curly-haired beauties. A woodworker's term. Curly maple. A rare figured wood prized by furniture makers and luthiers for its stunning three-dimensional grain. It was often sold by the inch, not the board foot. I stood there in the dusty silence of the attic, the old letter trembling in my hand. A forgotten inheritance. A worthless patch of dirt. My daughter's mocking words rang in my ears, but now they were followed by my father's quiet wisdom. A plan vague and unformed began to stir in the back of my mind. This wasn't just about land anymore. This was about legacy. And I suddenly had a feeling that my little hobby was about to become very, very significant. The next morning I bypassed the workshop entirely. The rocking horse for Leo could wait. With the old hand-drawn map tucked into my jacket pocket, I drove the pickup towards Black Creek Mountain. The paved road soon gave way to gravel, which then narrowed into a dirt track overgrown with weeds. It was clear no one had been up this way for a very long time. I parked the truck where the track became impassable and continued on foot. The air grew cooler as I climbed the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, replacing the faint smell of exhaust. It was quiet up here, a profound silence, broken only by the rustle of a squirrel in the undergrowth, or the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. According to the map, the 80-acre parcel was another half-mile in a section marked simply as North Woods. I walked for what felt like an hour, my boots sinking into the soft ground, following the contours of the land that my grandfather had once walked. This wasn't just a piece of property, it was a piece of my history. I felt a connection to the men who came before me, a quiet understanding of their love for this rugged, untamed land. Finally, I reached the area marked on the map. At first, it looked like any other part of the forest, a dense stand of birch, oak, and maple. I pushed through a thicket of ferns, my initial hope starting to wane. Maybe my father had been mistaken. Maybe it was just the sentimental ramblings of an old man. But then I saw it. It was a maple tree, but unlike any I had seen before. It stood taller than the rest, its bark thick and deeply furrowed like the wrinkled skin of an ancient giant. As I drew closer, I noticed a subtle shimmering quality to the bark, a series of horizontal ripples running beneath the surface. My heart began to beat a little faster. I ran my hand over the rough surface, and I could feel them undulations in the wood like muscles tensed just beneath the skin. I moved deeper into the grove. There were more of them. Dozens. A whole stand of old-growth sugar maples, all bearing the same distinct rippled pattern. These were the curly-haired beauties. Pulling my old pocket knife from my jeans, I found a fallen branch of a decent size. With the practiced skill of a lifetime, I carefully shaved away the outer bark and a thin layer of sapwood. What was revealed underneath made me catch my breath. The wood grain wasn't straight and uniform. It shimmered and moved in the faint light, a three-dimensional holographic pattern that looked like rippling water. It was figured maple of the highest quality, curly or fiddleback as some called it, the kind of wood that made musical instruments sing and custom furniture glow with an inner light. I leaned against the trunk of the ancient tree, the piece of shimmering wood clutched in my hand. It was all real. My father's letter wasn't a fairy tale. This worthless patch of dirt, this forgotten inheritance, was a treasure, a quiet living treasure that had been waiting here in the silent woods for generations. And now I was its keeper. I knew then that my next step couldn't be guided by anger alone. It had to be as precise and deliberate as the grain in the wood itself. I needed an expert. I needed someone who understood not just the value of wood, but the language it spoke. Back in the familiar, dust-scented air of my workshop, I sat on my stool and stared at the small, shimmering piece of curly maple. It felt warm in my palm, alive with potential. This was beyond my expertise. I knew how to work wood, but I didn't know the business of it, not on this scale. I needed someone I could trust implicitly. I reached for the old rotary phone on the wall, a relic like me, and pulled my worn address book from a drawer. My finger traced down the page until it landed on a name, Michael Chen. We'd done business together years ago before I retired. Michael was a timber consultant, a man whose knowledge of rare woods was legendary in New England. More importantly, he was an honest man. He answered on the third ring, his voice deeper than I remembered, but still carrying the same calm authority. Michael Chen speaking. "Michael, it's Steve Croft," I said, my own voice feeling rusty with disuse. There was a pause, then a warm chuckle. "Steve, my God, man, it's been an age. I thought you'd vanished into your workshop for good. How are you?" "I'm well, Michael. Listen, I know this is out of the blue, but I have something I need an expert opinion on. Something unusual. Could I buy you a cup of coffee?" Another pause, this one filled with curiosity. "Unusual is my specialty, Steve. You know that. How about tomorrow morning, Betty's Diner, 9 o'clock. The next day, I was sitting in a red vinyl booth with the piece of curly maple wrapped in a cloth napkin on the table in front of me. Betty's Diner was a local institution, the kind of place where the coffee was always hot and the waitress knew your order by heart. Michael slid into the booth opposite me, looking older, his hair now more salt than pepper, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. After exchanging pleasantries about our families and the passing years, I pushed the napkin-wrapped bundle across the table. "This is why I called," I said. He unwrapped it carefully. His professional demeanor slipped for a moment as he saw the wood. He picked it up, turning it over and over in his hands, his fingers tracing the iridescent grain. He held it up to the light filtering through the diner window. A low whistle escaped his lips. "Well, I'll be," he murmured, his voice hushed with a wood man's reverence. "Where in the world did you get this, Steve? This is master-grade curly maple. I haven't seen figuring this tight in 20 years. It's from a piece of family land," I said, keeping my voice even. "Up on Black Creek Mountain. My father's letter called them curly-haired beauties." Michael's eyes widened. "A whole stand of it?" he asked, leaning forward, his coffee forgotten. "I think so," I replied. "A good number of them. Old growth." He sat back, his mind clearly racing, calculating. He looked at me, a new respect in his eyes. "Steve," he said slowly, "if you have what you think you have, this isn't just valuable. This is a legacy. A single log of this quality could fetch a small fortune from the right buyer. An entire stand of it." He shook his head in disbelief. "We need to go up there. I need to see it with my own eyes." The next morning felt different. A sense of purpose hummed beneath the surface of the quiet dawn. Michael arrived not in a car, but in a sturdy, mud-splattered Jeep carrying a worn leather satchel of tools. He was no longer just an old friend having coffee. He was a professional on a mission. We drove up the familiar track in my truck, the silence between us comfortable, filled with anticipation. When we reached the edge of the North Woods, I led him into the grove. He stopped at the entrance, his eyes scanning the canopy, his entire posture shifting. He was like a scholar entering a lost library. He didn't say a word for a long time, simply walking from one ancient maple to the next, his hand resting gently on the bark of each, his gaze analytical. "Incredible," he finally breathed the word, a soft puff of condensation in the cold air. "Absolutely incredible." He unslung his satchel and took out his tools. One was a core sampler, a specialized drill that could extract a small, pencil-thin cylinder of wood without harming the tree. He selected one of the larger maples and carefully drilled into the trunk. He extracted the core sample, his movements precise and reverent. He held the core up to the light, examining it with a small magnifying glass. "Look at that, Steve," he said, his voice filled with awe. He handed it to me. Even in that small sample, I could see the shimmering, tightly packed curls of the grain running deep into the heartwood. It was breathtaking. "This figuring is consistent throughout," Michael explained, his excitement barely contained. "It's not just surface level. This is genetic, Steve. A whole grove of genetically superior figured maple. This is a sleeping giant." For the next 2 hours he worked methodically. He took measurements, made notes in a small leather-bound book, and took core samples from a dozen different trees throughout the 80 acres. I followed him, watching the scale of my inheritance slowly dawning on me. This wasn't just a few valuable trees. It was a self-contained ecosystem of unparalleled value. Finally, he packed up his tools and sat down on a fallen log, looking out over the silent forest. He was quiet for a long time, doing calculations in his head and in his notebook. So I finally asked, my voice barely a whisper, "What are we looking at?" He took a deep breath and met my eyes. "Steve, I've been doing this for 40 years. I have appraised timber stands across North America. I have never seen anything like this." Conservatively, he said, emphasizing the word, based on the board-foot estimate, the age of the trees, and the current market rate for master-grade figured maple, "you are standing in the middle of a forest worth between $7 and $8 million. The number hung in the air, vast and incomprehensible. $7 million. I sank down onto the log beside him, the strength draining from my legs. The forest around me, which had always been just a quiet patch of green on a map, suddenly pulsed with a new powerful energy. It wasn't just wood and leaves anymore. It was leverage. It was power. It was justice. And it was all mine. The drive back down the mountain was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than the ride up. The earlier anticipation had been replaced by the heavy grounding weight of reality. The number Michael had spoken aloud seemed to have its own gravity, pressing me deeper into the worn seat of my truck. I wasn't just Steve Croft, the retired woodworker, anymore. I was the owner of an $8 million forest. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. Michael broke the silence as we hit the paved road. "So the big question is, what's next? A find like this, it'll cause a stir. I know at least 3 high-end instrument makers and a half-dozen bespoke furniture companies that would kill for access to this timber. We could set up a managed auction and invite private bidders. You could be a very wealthy man by Christmas, Steve." I listened, nodding slowly, but my mind was elsewhere. Wealth was the tool, not the goal. "Selling it is the end game, Michael," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "But the timing has to be perfect. I don't want to sell it fast. I want to sell it right. He glanced over at me, sensing the shift in my tone. What are you thinking? I'm thinking this is a private family matter, I said carefully. For now, this discovery stays between you and me. No auctions, no bidders, not yet. I need your professional discretion. Can I count on that? Michael held my gaze for a moment, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. You have my word, Steve. I've kept quieter secrets for smaller treasures. But what's the play? You can't just sit on it forever. An asset like this needs to be managed. First, I said, my plan beginning to take shape, clear and sharp as a freshly honed chisel. I need a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the best corporate and estate lawyer in the state. Someone who can help me set up a trust, a foundation, something solid, impenetrable. That would be Arthur Vance in Burlington, Michael said without hesitation. Sharp as a tack and discreet as a priest. Good, I nodded. And second, I need you to draw up an official notarized appraisal, a full report detailing the species, the grade, the estimated yield, and the market value. Make it look like it's for an insurance policy or an estate valuation. Something official but not alarming. A slow smile spread across Michael's face as he began to understand. He didn't know the whole story, but he could see the pieces I was putting on the board. You're not just a woodworker, are you, Steve? You're playing chess. I've learned that sometimes you have to, I replied, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. The image of Amanda's smug face, the memory of her dismissive wave, flashed in my mind. Sometimes you have to become the architect of consequences. We drove the rest of the way in a comfortable conspiratorial silence. When I dropped him off at his jeep, he turned to me, his expression serious. Be careful, Steve. Money like this changes things. It changes people. I know I said the words heavy with meaning. I'm counting on it. The law offices of Vance and Associates were a world away from my workshop. Located on the top floor of a glass building overlooking Lake Champlain, the space was all polished mahogany plush leather chairs and the quiet, expensive hum of money at work. I felt out of place in my flannel shirt and worn corduroys, but I straightened my shoulders and walked to the reception desk. I was not here as a humble carpenter. I was here as a client. Arthur Vance was exactly as Michael had described him. An older gentleman in a perfectly tailored tweed suit with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He greeted me with a firm handshake and led me into a corner office with a panoramic view of the Adirondack Mountains. Michael Chen speaks very highly of you, Mr. Croft, Vance said, gesturing for me to sit. He also said you had a matter requiring the utmost discretion. I do, I said, getting straight to the point. I opened my briefcase and slid the thick-bound appraisal report across his desk. I'd like you to read this first. Vance put on a pair of gold-rimmed reading glasses and began to read. I watched his expression change from polite interest to focused intensity and finally to controlled astonishment. He looked up at me over the rims of his glasses, his professional mask firmly in place, but his eyes betrayed his surprise. This is remarkable, he said, his voice a low murmur. Quite possibly the most significant private timber holding in the state. Congratulations, Mr. Croft. Or my condolences, depending on how you look at it. Wealth like this can be a burden. I intend for it to be a burden for others, I replied calmly. That's why I'm here. I want to set up two things. First, an irrevocable trust for my grandson Leo Croft. The sole asset of this trust will be this parcel of land, and all proceeds from its eventual sale. The beneficiary, my grandson, cannot access the funds until his 25th birthday, and only on the condition that he has completed an apprenticeship in a skilled trade. Vance raised an eyebrow, intrigued. An interesting stipulation. And the second is a charitable foundation, I continued. The Croft Foundation for American Craftsmanship. It will provide scholarships and grants to young people wanting to learn traditional trades, woodworking, masonry, blacksmithing, the like. A significant portion of the sale will fund this foundation. He nodded, taking notes. And what about your daughter, Amanda? He asked delicately. My daughter, I said, my voice level and cold, will receive nothing. That is to be made explicitly legally clear. Vance finished his notes and folded his hands on the desk. This is all straightforward estate planning, Mr. Croft. We can have the paperwork drawn up within the week. Is there anything else? Here was the crucial part. Yes, I said, leaning forward. Once the trust and foundation are legally established and the land is transferred, I want you to arrange a confidential inquiry with the state's land use board. Frame it as a preliminary step for a potential conservation easement. It's a public record inquiry, but I want it done quietly. So quietly that it's bound to get noticed. A flicker of understanding lit up Vance's eyes. He saw the move on the chessboard. A quiet inquiry that will generate noise, he mused. Very well, Mr. Croft. Consider the pieces set. Weeks passed. The brilliant foliage of autumn gave way to the stark quiet beauty of early winter in Vermont. I spent my days in the workshop, the rhythmic scrape of my hand plane, a soothing meditation. I finished the rocking horse for Leo, its curly maple grain glowing under coats of hand-rubbed oil. I was patient. A good craftsman knows you can't rush the process. You set the pieces, apply the pressure, and wait for the glue to set. The first tremor came not as a shout, but as a whisper. It was a call from a neighbor, old Tom, from down the road. Steve, he said, his voice buzzing with the energy of fresh gossip. Heard a rumor down at the town hall. Something about your family's old parcel up on Black Creek Feds are looking at it for a conservation deal. Heard talk of some crazy numbers. Just town gossip, Tom, I said calmly, sanding a piece of cherry wood. You know how it is. But I knew the seed had sprouted. Vance's quiet inquiry had done its job perfectly. In a small town, a secret is just a story waiting for the right person to tell it. If you're enjoying Stephen's story so far, please take a moment to hit that like button. It truly helps. Now let's see what happened next. The call I was truly waiting for came 2 days later. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was in the kitchen reading the paper when my phone rang. Amanda's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering, taking a slow sip of my tea. Dad. Her voice was different. The clipped, impatient tone was gone, replaced by a syrupy sweetness that set my teeth on edge. Hi. How are you doing? I'm fine, Amanda, I said, my voice neutral. What's up? Oh, nothing much. Ryan and I were just talking about you. We feel just awful that we haven't come to visit since Thanksgiving. It's been so hectic. How's your, hobby? It's fine, I said. There was an awkward pause. I could hear Ryan whispering in the background. Just ask him, Amanda cleared her throat. So, Dad, funny thing. Ryan was talking to a buddy of his who works in real estate, and he heard the most ridiculous rumor. Something about that old patch of forest you own. Something about it being worth a lot of money. She laughed, a brittle, unconvincing sound. Isn't that just the craziest thing? I stayed silent, letting her hang in the space she had created. Dad, she finally said, the sweetness fraying at the edges. Is it true? Is what true, Amanda? I asked, making her say the words. The money, she blurted out, her voice a strained whisper. Is the land really valuable? I took another slow sip of my tea before answering. I'm having it looked at, I said, my words chosen with the precision of a dovetail joint. An old piece of property like that, it's always good to know what you've got. I offered nothing more. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with greed and panic. She didn't know that I knew about her post. She didn't know that I had a plan. To her, I was just her simple old father who had stumbled into a fortune. And she was terrified of being left out. The game had begun. The visit was not an isolated event. It was the opening salvo in what I came to think of as the siege of affection. My phone, which had often sat silent for days, now buzzed with a relentless optimism. Dad, just calling to say hi, Amanda's cheerful voice would trill through the receiver at least twice a day. Thinking of you, the calls were always short, never deep. She'd ask what I was doing, but never wait to hear the details. She'd tell me she loved me, the words feeling rehearsed, hollow. I remained polite, but distant, a calm, immovable object against which her waves of forced sentimentality crashed and receded. My brevity seemed to unnerve her, and with each call, a note of desperation crept into her voice. Then came the invitations. Dad, Ryan, and I are going to that new French bistro in Burlington on Saturday. You have to come, our treat, of course. I have plans, Amanda. I'd say even if my only plan was to sit on my porch and watch the sunset. What about a weekend trip? We could go down to Boston, see a show. I'm not much for the city anymore. Ryan's been looking at new trucks for you, a brand new Ford F-150. He thinks your old one is a death trap. My truck runs just fine, I'd reply, my grip tightening on the phone. The truck she and her husband had once mocked was now a target for their strategic generosity. Every offer was a hook, every invitation a trap. They weren't trying to connect with me. They were trying to purchase me to indebt me with favors I had never asked for. One afternoon, a delivery truck pulled up and dropped off a large flat-screen television. There was no note, but I knew who it was from. It sat in its box in the middle of my living room for 3 days before I called them. Amanda, a television arrived. Oh yes, we just thought your old one was so small. A little surprise, I don't want it, I said simply. Come and get it, or I'm donating it to the Veterans Hall. There was a stunned silence on the other end, followed by a choked but. Dad, it was a gift. A gift is something given freely, Amanda. I said, my voice quiet but firm. This feels like an obligation. I'm not interested in being obligated. I hung up before she could reply. I knew I was being cruel, but it was a necessary cruelty. I had to make it clear that I was not for sale. My silence, my refusals, my polite but unyielding distance, these were my only defenses. The more they pushed, the more I retreated into my quiet world of wood and solitude, letting their frantic efforts echo in the space between us. Their siege was not breaking me down. It was revealing them. With every call, every unwanted gift, every forced smile, they were showing me exactly who they had become. And they were proving to me, beyond any doubt, that the path I had chosen was the right one. The architect of consequences was simply letting the design unfold. They came on a Tuesday. There was no pretense this time, no surprise visit with a gift basket. The Lexus screeched to a halt in the gravel, and Amanda and Ryan got out, their movements sharp, angry. I saw them from the workshop window and calmly set down my carving knife. The mask of affection had been discarded. This was a confrontation. I met them on the porch, wiping my hands on a rag, my body language a silent barrier. Amanda marched right up to the steps, her face a thundercloud. Ryan stood behind her, arms crossed, looking like a cheap imitation of a tough guy. "What is your game, Dad?" Amanda demanded, her voice sharp and stripped of all its previous sweetness. "The phone calls, the invitations, the television. We are trying here. What do you want from us? Trying to do what, Amanda?" I asked, my voice quiet. "Trying to be a family," she shot back, her voice rising. "Trying to reconnect, and all you do is push us away. Ever since that stupid rumor about the land, you've been acting cold, vengeful." "The land is a private matter," I said, my tone unchanging. Ryan stepped forward, his patience clearly gone. "Oh, cut the crap, Steve," he sneered. "A private matter. We're your family. Don't we deserve to know what's going on? We hear from a realtor in town that you might be sitting on a gold mine, and you say nothing. You just shut us out. You shut me out a long time ago." "Ryan," I said, looking him directly in the eye. "Long before any gold mine came into the picture." Amanda's face crumpled, but it wasn't with sadness. It was with frustration. "This isn't fair. We made a mistake at Thanksgiving. It was a stupid joke. Is that what this is about? You're going to punish us for one stupid joke by cutting us out of our own inheritance." There it was. The truth raw and ugly. Our own inheritance. They saw the forest not as my property, my legacy from my father, but as something that was already rightfully theirs. They hadn't come to apologize. They had come to collect. "There is nothing to cut you out of, Amanda," I said, the words falling like chips of ice. "Because you were never in. What I do with my property is my business. It has nothing to do with you." "I am your daughter," she shrieked, the sound echoing in the quiet afternoon. "Yes," I said, a profound sadness washing over me. "You are, and that is the great tragedy of it all." Ryan took another step up, his posture menacing. "Listen here, old man." "No, you listen," I interrupted, my voice dropping low, losing all its warmth and gaining an edge of steel they had never heard before. "This conversation is over. You are not welcome here. Don't call. Don't visit. Don't set foot on this property again." They stood there, stunned into silence by my finality. The fury in their eyes was replaced by a look of disbelief, the shock of a spoiled child who has been told no for the very first time. I turned without another word, walked back into my house, and locked the door, the solid click of the deadbolt echoing the closing of a chapter in my life. The silence that followed their departure was not empty. It was clean. For the first time in months, my home felt entirely my own, scrubbed clean of the toxic residue of their greed and expectations. The deadbolt clicking into place had been more than just a sound. It was a final, decisive act of self-preservation. I had grieved the loss of my daughter long before that final ugly confrontation. What I felt now was a quiet, solemn sense of release. With the emotional chains finally broken, I was free to act. The next morning I called Arthur Vance. "Arthur, it's Steve Croft. It's time." There was no need for further explanation. Within a day he had arranged a private off-market meeting with a potential buyer Michael Chen had recommended. They were not a massive timber corporation, but a family-owned, high-end furniture company from Pennsylvania, renowned for their commitment to sustainable forestry and master craftsmanship. They didn't just see the forest as a commodity. They understood its soul. The meeting was held in Vance's office. The CEO, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a firm handshake, looked at the appraisal report with the same reverence Michael had shown. "Mr. Croft," she said, her voice filled with genuine respect, "this is the find of a lifetime. We would be honored to be the custodians of this wood. We will harvest, selectively replant every tree, and ensure this forest continues to thrive for another 100 years. Her words sealed the deal. We negotiated a price that was fair to both sides, a number that still made my head spin, but the terms of the sale were what mattered most to me. They agreed to my conditions of sustainable harvesting. My father's curly-haired beauties would be treated with the respect they deserved. Signing the papers felt like the final stroke of a hand plane on a perfectly finished piece. It was smooth, clean, and true. The next day, I was back in Vance's office for the final steps. The proceeds of the sale, a staggering sum, were transferred. With Vance and 2 witnesses present, I signed the documents that officially established the Leo Croft Skilled Trades Trust and the Croft Foundation for American Craftsmanship. Vance slid the finalized documents across the mahogany desk. "It's done, Steve," he said, a rare smile touching his lips. "The trust is funded and secure. The foundation is chartered. Your grandson's future is protected, and your legacy is established." I looked down at the papers, at the official seals, and the crisp black ink. This was my true inheritance. Not the money itself, but the power to direct it, to shape it into something meaningful, something that would outlast me. It was not an act of revenge, not really. It was an act of restoration. I was restoring the value of craftsmanship over greed, of legacy over materialism, of love over obligation. I left the law office and walked out into the cold, clear Burlington air. I didn't feel like a millionaire. I didn't feel powerful or vengeful. I felt like a woodworker who had just finished his most important project. I felt at peace. But I knew there was one final necessary step. The story wasn't quite over yet. The news as designed had traveled. Land sales are a matter of public record, and the establishment of a multi-million-dollar charitable foundation in a small Vermont town becomes gossip faster than a winter fire spreads through dry wood. I had spent the week in my workshop, a quiet, peaceful bubble. I was showing Leo how to hold a chisel, his small hands wrapped around mine, when the silver Lexus pulled into the driveway. It moved slowly this time, hesitantly, like a wounded animal. I told Leo to stay inside and watch a cartoon, then stepped out onto the porch. They looked like ghosts of their former selves. Ryan's expensive suit was rumpled, his face pale and unshaven. Amanda's makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes, her confident posture replaced by a desperate slump. The performance was over. All that was left was the raw, gaping wound of their greed. "Dad," Amanda began, her voice cracking, barely a whisper. She took a step forward, her hands outstretched as if pleading for alms. "We saw. The town records. The sale. The foundation. We messed up." Steve Ryan cut, in his voice hoarse. He had lost all of his previous arrogance. "We were arrogant. We were fools. We are so sorry for how we treated you." His apology, now that the money was gone, meant less than nothing. I remained silent, standing at the top of the porch steps. I was the gatekeeper to a fortune they could no longer access, and they knew it. "Please, Dad," Amanda sobbed, tears finally streaming down her face. "Don't do this. I'm your daughter, your only child. How could you give it all away to strangers, to a foundation?" "I didn't give it all away," I said, my voice calm and even. It held no anger, only a quiet finality. "I gave it to my legacy. Half of it will go to ensuring my grandson never has to depend on the charity of people like you. The other half will go to helping young people learn the value of working with their hands. A value you never understood." "But why?" she cried, her voice rising in desperation. "Was it just the drill, one stupid, thoughtless gift? You would disown your own daughter for that." This was the moment. The secret she had come begging for. "No, Amanda," I said softly. "It was never about the drill. The drill was just the receipt. It was proof of purchase for a transaction you'd been making for years. You traded my respect for the Hamiltons' approval. You traded my love for a bigger house. You traded my dignity for a joke on social media. And at Thanksgiving you tried to trade my entire life's work for a $20 power tool. It turns out that was a very bad deal for you." Ryan put his head in his hands. Amanda stared at me, the full weight of my words finally landing. She saw that this wasn't an act of spite. It was a judgment. "Is there anything," she whispered, her last shred of hope fading, "anything we can do to fix this?" "No," I said, and the word was as solid and unyielding as the granite bedrock of Vermont itself. "The papers are signed. The money is gone. The inheritance has been passed down." I paused, then delivered the final cut. "Just not to you." I watched the last light of hope die in their eyes, replaced by the hollow understanding of a permanent, irreversible loss. They had nothing left to say. There was nothing left to fight for. They turned 2 broken people and got back into their silver car, which now seemed less like a symbol of wealth and more like a cage. As they drove away, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a quiet, sad closure. The architect had finished his work. Winter gave way to the slow, muddy thaw of a Vermont spring. The snow melted, feeding the creeks that ran down the mountain, and the first green buds appeared on the maple tree outside my kitchen window. The world felt like it was waking up from a long, troubled sleep, and in many ways so was I. I no longer started my mornings with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I no longer checked my phone for messages that would either be absent or unwelcome. The silence in my house was peaceful again. The siege was over. The ghosts had been exorcised. The garish orange drill sat on a shelf for a month. One day, without ceremony, I put it in a box with some old tools I no longer used and dropped it off at the donation center in town. It was just an object, a piece of plastic and metal, and it no longer had any power over me. Its story was finished. My story, however, was now focused on the future. Leo spent most Saturdays with me. He was a natural in the workshop, his small hands surprisingly steady, his eyes wide with a quiet, focused curiosity that reminded me so much of myself at his age. He wasn't just a visitor, he was an apprentice. Today we were working on a small, simple box made from a piece of cherry wood. I was teaching him how to use a hand plane, how to listen to the whisper of the blade as it shaved off a ribbon of wood thin enough to read through. "Not too fast, little man," I said softly, my hand guiding his. "Feel the wood. Let the tool do the work. You have to follow the grain, not fight it." He nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. He pushed the plane forward, and a perfect fragrant curl of cherry wood peeled away from the surface. A triumphant smile broke across his face. "I did it, Grandpa. You sure did," I said, my heart swelling with a quiet, profound joy. "You listened to the wood." In that moment watching him, I understood the true nature of my inheritance. It wasn't the millions of dollars safely tucked away in his name. That money was just a foundation, a safety net to ensure he would have the freedom to choose a life of purpose, not just a life of necessity. The real inheritance was this: the scent of sawdust, the weight of a well-balanced tool, the quiet satisfaction of creating something beautiful and true with your own hands. It was the knowledge that I was passing down the values I was instilling. I had spent months as the architect of consequences, carefully setting pieces on a board to achieve a specific outcome. But here with my grandson, I was just a builder again. A builder of boxes, a builder of character, a builder of a future. The noise of Amanda and Ryan's world had faded, completely replaced by the satisfying shk of a sharp blade on good wood and the happy, unburdened laughter of a child. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I was the wealthiest man in the world. I never heard from Amanda or Ryan again. Sometimes I hear whispers from town that they moved away chasing some new venture in another state. Their story became a cautionary tale told over coffee at Betty's Diner, a lesson in what happens when you mistake price for value. I hold no ill will towards them anymore, only a distant, quiet pity for the richness they chose not to see. My life is full. The workshop is my sanctuary, and the foundation I started has already helped 3 promising young apprentices begin their careers. Last week, I received a letter from a young woman in Pennsylvania, the first recipient of the Croft Scholarship. She included a photo of a beautiful hand-carved box she had made. Her gratitude was a reward far greater than any dollar amount. My world is not loud or flashy, but it is solid. It is built from good wood, honest work, and the unwavering love of a grandson who now knows the difference between a maple and an oak just by the feel of its bark. Wealth, I've learned, isn't what you accumulate in a bank account. It's what you pass on in your heart and in your hands. Respect, like a sturdy dovetail joint, must be earned and carefully fitted. It cannot be demanded or bought. My daughter saw a worthless patch of dirt, but my father saw a secret. He taught me to look closer to see the unique grain beneath the rough bark. That was the real inheritance he left me, and it's the one I am now passing to Leo. A legacy not of money but of meaning. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.